Hello and welcome, folks. I'm just going to take a little bit of time to let folks filter in. Let's give it about a minute. Welcome, welcome, folks who are just joining. We're just giving it about a minute before we start. Oh, geez. Sorry about that, folks. That's enough. Give me one moment, folks, and then we'll start very shortly. Welcome to the folks who are just joining. We're just taking a minute to let folks filter in, but I think we're looking good. So welcome, everybody. My name is Emily Ann Opala. I am the Knowledge and Research Lead here at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. And I'm really pleased to welcome you all to our Transitioning to the Workplace webinar today. So before I go any further, I just want to take a little bit of a second to do a brief land acknowledgement. I want to say we're all viewing and participating in this webinar on traditional territories of Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. And we want to recognize their contributions to this place and express our gratitude for our ability to come together and learn today. And the other thing I really want to say in this land acknowledgement is there are Indigenous peoples all across Turtle Island right now that, as we're speaking right now, that are fighting. And they're fighting for things like the land. They're defending the land, they're defending the water, they're defending their women and two-spirit folks who are experiencing gender-based violence. And it behooves us as settlers, for those of us that are settlers on this land, to see what we can do to support those fights. So with that, I want to get into a little bit of housekeeping. So I want to draw all of your attention at the bottom of the screen to, there are two functions here. There's a Q&A function and there's a chat function. That chat function is for you all to connect with each other however you'd like. Use it to share your insights, share things that are occurring to you. And the Q&A is for any questions that you have for our panelists. And we're going to have a lot of time today for questions. So we really encourage you to use that Q&A portion. So throughout the presentation, whenever a question comes up for you, feel free to use that Q&A to pop that in there. We will be doing questions at the end of the session. And the other thing I want to make you all aware of is that following this webinar, you'll be receiving an email from Zoom to confirm that you attended. And in that email, you'll find a link to a survey to let us know how we did today. And we would really appreciate if you could take just the 3 minutes that it takes to do this survey and submit your feedback to us. We really do appreciate that feedback. So with all of that housekeeping done, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. So Dianne Wintermute was called to the bar in 1984. Most of her career has been dedicated to advancing and defending the rights and entitlements of persons with disabilities by providing advice, representation in test case litigation, law reform activities, and legal education. She has appeared before various administrative tribunals and at all levels of court, including the Supreme Court of Canada. Isabelle Aubé is a bilingual trainer and facilitator at CMHA Ontario. She's a certified psychological health and safety advisor with a passion for promoting mental health in the workplace. She uses her skills as a certified business and lifestyle coach trained in neurolinguistic programming to inspire participants to make positive steps into well-being. Isabelle was a 2020 and 2021 Global Top 500 Award recipient for her contributions in the sport industry and Indigenous communities. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I'll pass it now on to Dianne, who will share a presentation with us.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Emily Ann, for the introduction. Today, I'm going to do a general overview of the human rights laws that impact employment for persons with disabilities. I'm going to try to keep it very short so that we can hone in on questions that you might have about how someone's human rights can be upheld in the course of applying for or during employment. There are two sources of rights in Ontario. The first is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AODA. The AODA is a law that—
I'm just going to pause you for a second, Dianne. I'm not sure if you have your, you're sharing your screen right now, but we cannot see the screen share.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Just want to make sure people can see your fabulous slides.
Okay.
There we are. There we are.
Okay.
Fabulous.
So the AODA is a law that requires obligated organizations to follow standards in order to become more accessible to people, with the goal of having an accessible Ontario by 2025. It's important for us to remember that the requirements under the AODA standards are minimum requirements. So they're the bottom of the most basic requirements that an obligated organization needs to follow. There are currently 5 standards under the AODA. They are information and communications, employment, transportation, design of public services, public spaces, and customer service. There are 3 additional standards that have been out for consultation, and they are the healthcare standard, post-secondary education, and K-12 standards. So the work has been done by standards development committees in these areas, but they're not yet standards. There are weak enforcement and compliance mechanisms under the AODA, and there are no individual remedies if any of the standards aren't being met. So in order to enforce rights in Ontario, we have the Human Rights Code, which provides a route for appeals if there are violations of someone's rights protected by the code. The ground of disability is one of the protected areas, and disability is defined very, very broadly in order to capture new or emerging disabilities. And I think it's also important for us to know that the other grounds that are protected under the code, like race, gender identity, ethnic origin, age, those coupled with disabilities are considered intersecting characteristics. And often people with intersecting characteristics have additional barriers that are in their way to full participation in our society. As I said, the code protects persons with disabilities from discrimination and harassment in 5 social areas. Those areas are when receiving goods, services, or using facilities. In housing, that includes private rental, cooperative, social and supported or assisted housing. And one of the interesting things about housing is that there's an additional protected ground for housing only, and that is receipt of social assistance. None of the other protected grounds include social assistance. It's only for housing. You can't discriminate on the basis of someone's income when they're applying for housing. Contracts, employment, and employment is defined very broadly as well. It includes full-time or part-time work, volunteer work, student internships, special employment programs, probationary employment, and temporary or contract employment. And then finally, you can't be discriminated against under a protected ground when joining or belonging to a union, a professional association, or another vocational association. So employment is defined very broadly. You have the right not to be discriminated because of your disability in all areas of employment. So that includes the application stage or recruitment stage, hiring, training, work assignments, shifts, promotions, vacations, benefits, evaluations, and dismissals. The code also protects persons with disability from reprisal, which is an action or a threat that is intended as retaliation for claiming your rights under the code and trying to have them enforced. The way that persons with disabilities get equal access to employment is through the duty to accommodate. Employers have a duty to accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities who are negatively affected by a rule, a requirement, or a standard. And there's two ways in which this can occur. One is through a procedural duty to accommodate, which is the consideration of how the accommodation measures are discussed and put into place. Often it's referred to as the accommodation conversation. And then the substantive duty to accommodate, which are the actual accommodations that an employer must provide to a person with a disability in order that they have equal access to the employment realm. So accommodation is something that gives persons with disabilities an equal opportunity to get a job, perform their job, and it happens throughout the life cycle or journey of employment at all stages. Accommodations have to respect a person's dignity and autonomy. It must be individualized, and it must allow for full integration and participation. And one of the emphasis here is the individualized nature of accommodations. We all experience disability in unique and different ways. And so what's important is that my employer accommodate my disabilities in a way that respects my dignity and autonomy. And if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them at the end. So it's important for you to have a discussion with your employer and work collaboratively to find a solution that works for you. The collaboration bit is really important because if an employee does not participate in the accommodations discussion or doesn't have that, refuses to have that conversation with their employer, then that may be a defense should someone appeal to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. In addition, it's important to know that it is the employer's responsibility to provide that accommodation and pay for it. I mentioned the procedural duty to accommodate, which is to have an accommodation conversation. the employer needs to consider and discuss accommodation options with you to find a way that you can best be accommodated, what works for you. The other duty is the substantive duty, which is the actual accommodation provided. And the employer's obligation is to provide accommodations to the point of undue hardship. Before I turn to undue hardship, I do want to say that the request for accommodations must be initiated by the person with a disability. An employer isn't to guess at or assume what accommodations might work or whether accommodations are needed. The person with a disability, if they require accommodations in order to perform the job, then they have to ask for them, and then there has to be a discussion about what those accommodations will be. Undue hardship is a very high standard because we don't want to place too low of a recognition on the duty to accommodate. So there are 3 defenses under the code to undue hardship. An employer has to say that the cost of providing, or can say that the cost of providing accommodations is too high to the degree that it would actually interrupt or interfere with the work of the organization. The employer has to determine whether there are any outside sources of funding that they can access in order to provide the necessary accommodations, or whether providing the accommodations would interfere with the health and safety of the person with a disability or their colleagues. If the employer can show that the requested accommodation will cause undue hardship, they still have an obligation to work with you to find a different way of accommodating you that works for your needs. And there's often a sense that providing accommodation is costly, but it's really not. There are lots of ways and creative ways that we can think about accommodation that don't have a lot of cost. So for example, if I need additional time to perform my job duties, providing me with additional time may not interfere with the workplace. Or if I need a screen reader, or if I need to take a break a couple of times a day for medication purposes, those are easy things for the employer to provide. So I think that, working together and having that accommodation conversation can produce some really creative results that won't add to high costs for the employer. Another limit on the duty to accommodate are bona fide occupational requirements. So if there's a qualification for the job that is essential to its performance, then the employer may be able to say no to a request for accommodation on that basis. But let's think about what's really essential in terms of performing the essential duties. So lots of employers say you must have a license to drive. Well, if my job is in Toronto and I'm required to get from A to B in order to deliver services, can I do it over the TTC? Can I get there by subway or taxi or bus? That makes the essential part of the job not so essential. So in order to figure out what an essential part of your job or a bona fide occupational requirement is, the employer has to show that the qualification is connected to the performance of the job, It was put in place honestly and in good faith, and it can't be changed without causing the employer undue hardship. Sometimes, if the qualification or standard is essential for the job, and you're already employed in that job, the employer might be obligated to offer you another job that doesn't have those qualifications and standard. And that's part of the duty to accommodate. Disclosing disability to your employer in the workplace is tricky for people. You can choose to disclose your disability prior to an interview by including it on your resume, particularly if you require accommodations during the hiring process. And I think this is a really important issue to remember, because if you don't ask for accommodations for the interview and the interview goes badly, the employer may not be responsible because you didn't ask for accommodations, they didn't know they had to provide them. And so that may be addressed, or that has to be addressed by the individual up front. You can choose to disclose after an interview. So if you have a visible disability or use an assistive device, that may be a visible disability, and the employer will know that there will be accommodation requirements. But persons with invisible disabilities, whether they're episodic, temporary, or ongoing, may require not to may decide not to disclose. And their reasons for not disclosing may be because they don't have an accommodation at this point in time. So if you don't have a need, then you don't need to disclose. And an example of that is, I have 4 weeks vacation and I require surgery. I will schedule my surgery so it occurs during my 4 months vacation, and the employer doesn't need to know what I'm doing on my vacation. But if you want to do something during your time at work, then you have to let your employer know and figure out how your requests can be best accommodated. You can also develop a disability after being hired, or realize after you're being hired that you require accommodations to meet your job responsibilities. What information can an employer ask for? One of the things that they cannot ask for is your diagnosis, and particularly in a mental health situation. What does a diagnosis tell my employer about what my accommodation needs are? Absolutely nothing. The employer can ask for more information to better understand what my disability-related accommodation or needs are. So a doctor's note that explains my abilities, my needs, or limitations can be requested. If they are requested, they must be kept completely confidential. And the only people allowed to have access to the information you provide are those who need to be a part of putting your accommodations in place. As I said, you don't have to, excuse me, share the cause of your disability or your diagnosis. 5 minutes?
Dianne, yeah, going to give you a wrap up.
Okay, so employers can do a number of things to assist persons with disabilities by posting job advertisements in accessible formats, welcoming applications from communities of persons with disability, and explaining what job tasks are essential. There may be a duty on your employer to inquire about accommodation needs during the course of employment. So if, for example, your you start acting in a way that is different than you have been, your employer may have a duty to ask whether you need assistance instead of assuming that it's a performance issue. And I think that what I'm going to do is end here and address any conversation or any questions that you might have in our ensuing discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Dianne. I really appreciated that. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm going to move it over now to Isabelle, who's going to share about the psychosocial factors.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to pull up my screen, so it'll just be a quick transition minute. If you guys can bear with me. There we go. Can you see my notes? It's always a question I need to ask.
Actually, I think I can see your notes right now.
Okay. All right. So I will stop that right now. I'll just take a quick minute. Apologies. Okay, should be good. There's always something, right?
Always something.
Yes, with Zoom, we love it. Okay. Yeah, I'll just take a quick minute. How are we now? Can you see
That
it?
looks good. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, fantastic. Welcome. So now we're going to talk about different factors that are important to consider when you are looking for a place to work. And one of the things that we can be sure of with the pandemic, if a workplace was not sound, if it wasn't a healthy workplace, it got exposed with the pandemic, because you add extra stress or challenges to a place that does not have a good psychological health and safety standard, and what's going to happen, things are going to fall apart a little bit. And that is the foundation of the Great Resignation of 2021. So we're going to talk about the 13 psychosocial factors that influence a positive workplace, things that you need to consider, not just the salary, not just the location, but these are the other things. We're going to go over them briefly. And at the end of my presentation, you have some other resources that you can check out if you want to learn more about this, because it will be a brief overview to keep it succinct. So the truth is 70% of Canadians are concerned about their psychological health and safety at the workspace. Now, this is concerning, and we saw why things fell apart in 2021 because of this, right? So I want you to take some time to really consider this, not only as a listener, but for you to personally assess your situations and see how you can improve them. Okay, we spend about 1/3 of our lives at work, which is why we need to be making sure that it is a healthy environment where we can flourish, where we can grow, where we can feel like we're, fulfilling our purpose in one way or another manner. So we're going to go over these together. But first, I want to ask, and it's a rhetoric question because I will give you the definition in just 1 second. What is psychological health and safety in the workplace? Now, it's become a bit of a buzzword for all of us, unfortunately, and we need to start really qualifying it to make sure that our lives can, remain healthy and that we have extra energy at the end of the day to take care of other things, have a great life with a family life, balance social life, etc. So the Canadian Standards Association in the National Psychological Health and Safety Standard defines a psychologically healthy and safe workplace as a workplace that promotes workers' psychological well-being and actively works to prevent harm to worker psychological health, including in negligent, reckless, or intentional ways. Now, one of the ways that we do this, that we actually qualify this, and through many studies, we've been able to identify the determining factor of a psychologically healthy and safe workspace through all the different research. We've identified the 13 that are here, and we're going to go over them very briefly together. Now, these have been identified by a large body of research as areas of fundamental psychological risk. And the definitions and language that are used here are unique to guarding minds at work. So you might want to note that and explore this website a little bit further. There are tons of resources there that you could use to assess your workplace and improve it if need be. Now, let's look at the different social factors one at a time. Okay, so I'm just going to move this around a little bit so that I'm able to see. Okay, so what is a positive workplace culture? Well, it's the degree to which a work environment is characterized by trust, honesty, and fairness, right? There's a positive and productive social process that happens on a daily basis so that you're able to do your work and feel good about your interactions with your colleagues as well, right? And a positive organizational culture, it's a predictor of cooperative behavior, organizational citizenship. People will stay there longer. There's a commitment and a loyalty to the organization. It's created by everyone who works there, okay? So from top management right down to the people who are taking care of, the custodians, they all contribute to the organizational culture. So this is something that you might want to explore and investigate before you start working somewhere. And what is psychological? The second factor we're going to talk about is psychological and social support. So what is that? That's an environment that is supportive of employees' psychological and mental health concerns. And it also responds appropriately when there is a challenge that happens. The way work is carried out and the context in which work occurs can have significant impact on an employee's mental health, whether it's positive or negative. So we want to make sure that we're in an environment that supports our psychological well-being. And we're going to go over some questions a little bit later that you can ask in your interview to make sure that it does have this factor. The third one is clear leadership and expectation. Now, this is an effective leadership. It supports and helps employees know what they need to do and how their work contributes to the greater good of the organization, right? It also helps to know whether there are impending changes that are coming, because there's nothing worse. And I mean, we've all experienced it with COVID when something significant happens and we weren't able to prepare for it, right? So that creates an instability, and some people deal better with that than others. I mean, we all found out what that was like with COVID, right? We all got affected. So clear leadership and expectation is a huge factor. And I know for myself, it is imperative. I need to have good leadership to be able to perform properly. So this is one of the ones that mean the most to me. The next one is civility and respect. And this is a work environment where employees are respectful and considerate in their interactions, right? They show esteem. They care about each other. They're considerate, and they acknowledge dignity of others. They respect differences of opinions. It improves job satisfaction, perceptions of fairness, attitude, morale, teamwork, interest in personal development, and problem resolution. Okay, very important to have civility and respect. What about psychological competencies and requirements? And what does that mean? It means that there's a good fit between employees' interpersonal and emotional competencies and the requirements of the position. So they are capable of meeting the requirements of the position. They have the skills, they have the tools that they need, they have the support that they need. This is very important, right? Because there's nothing worse than coming into a position and not feeling like you can do a good job, consistently feeling criticized, or that you're falling short. The next psychosocial factor is growth and development. This is another big one for me as well. And what is that? That's the encouragement and support for the development of employees interpersonally and emotionally, as well as in their profession. Being able to access training, being able to improve on your skills, having the support, having access to courses, development, education, knowing that you're able to improve and maybe move up and increase your responsibilities. This is very important for many people. The lack of that, it creates morale goes down. People start turning off. They don't want to go to work anymore because they don't have the motivation. What's the point when it becomes Groundhog Day, right? They don't feel like they are contributing to the greater good, and they don't see the value of their position. Recognition and reward is another one that is very important, and that includes appropriate acknowledgement and appreciation of employees' efforts in a fair and timely manner. So recognition and rewards are critical to enhancing employee engagement and performance. Research has shown that employers with good recognition and career development programs scored significantly higher in terms of productivity, revenue, customer retention, and employee retention than those that did not. We need to be able to recognize the good things, catch people doing well instead of always correcting them and making them feel like they're not doing anything good. That is, I wouldn't want to go to that workspace. I don't know about you. So let's look at involvement and influence. This other psychosocial factor is where employees are included in discussions about how their work is done and how important decisions are made. This is important because if things are just changing and you don't understand why, you're more likely to resist it or resent it. So if employees don't believe they have a voice in the organization, they're likely to feel a sense of indifference or helplessness. Job alienation or non-involvement is associated with cynicism and distress, greater turnover, and burnout. The next one we're going to look at is workload management, and we've all had to deal with this one. We've had to learn how to work differently, work from home. If you weren't used to it, this was a big change. If you had family responsibilities on top of that, trying to get your work done while helping your kids in school is difficult. So what is workload management? Well, it's where the tasks and the responsibilities can be accomplished successfully within the time available. Heavy workload can affect the healthy work-life balance of employees and lead to poor morale and low job satisfaction. In particular, they may become resentful of added tasks and cause workplace apathy. And we all know one bad apple, right? One person who starts getting negative can actually have a domino effect on the whole workspace. Engagement. This is where workers feel connected to their work and are motivated to do their job well. Actively disengaged employees cause disruption and dissatisfaction within the company. Even actively engaged employees can experience decreased morale if the overall team's level of engagement falters. Next one is balance. This is where there's recognition of the need for balance between the demands of work, family, and personal life. We need to be able to accommodate people because our circumstances have been ever-changing, especially in the past 20 months. So poor work-life balance can lead to some serious consequences, such as fatigue. If you're overtired, it reduces your ability to work productively and think clearly. This can take a toll on your professional reputation as well as your health. Long working hours, and we've experienced this with COVID, where people are having more difficulties shutting down and shutting off. People are working more than they did before, even though they're saving on their commute time. So this can cause stress and have long-lasting adverse effects on someone's immune system. Very important to keep this in mind. We need to train ourselves and our employees to understand what this means and how to manage it. The next one we're going to talk about is psychological protection. So psychologically safe workplace is one that does not permit harm to employee mental health in careless, negligent, reckless, or intentional ways. It's one in which every practical effort is made to avoid reasonably foreseeable injury to mental health of employees. And this is from Shane, 2009. So a psychologically safe environment is where psychological safety is ensured. Workers feel able to ask questions, seek feedback, report mistakes and problems, or propose a new idea without fearing negative consequences. So poor work-life balance can lead to some serious consequences if you don't feel protected psychologically. The next one we're going to talk about, and this is the last one I believe in the series of the 13 psychosocial factors and the national standard for psychological health and safety, is the protection of physical safety. This one has become a big topic across the globe, right, with COVID-19. And what does it mean? I think we mostly understand what it means, but the definition is a psychological or protection of physical safety is where appropriate action is taken to protect the physical safety of employees. Physical safety is the absence of harm or injury that can be experienced by any person from a physical object or practices that include a physical object. And viruses. Physical objects can include a person, the room itself, furniture, medical equipment, prohibited item, toys, artwork, etc. Today we have COVID measures to add to the list. Now, after reviewing the 13 psychosocial factors that influence psychological health and safety, I have a question for you. And we're going to launch a poll, and I would like you to choose 3 of the psychological health and safety psychosocial factors that are the most important to you. So please feel welcome to choose 3 of them. Can everybody see the poll?
Should be able to see the poll. Can you see the poll, Isabelle?
I can see it.
Okay.
You're able to see if people are voting? Great.
Yeah, we're at 78% of folks have participated, and I think that might be where we land. Can you see the results, or would you like me to read them to you?
Oh, if you could, I can't see anything. So if you could put them
Okay.
up, great.
So how would you like these results? Would you like the
You can
top
share them.
three?
Yeah,
Okay,
you can
cool.
share them.
Let me just end the poll, actually share the results. There we go.
Excellent. Okay, so we have 27% for organizational culture, 36% psychological and social support, clear leadership and expectation with 64%, civility and respect 18%, psychological demands and psychological protection 9%, growth and development 55%. I'm glad. Recognition and reward, wow, 0%, really. Engagement, involvement, and influence 27%, workload management and work-life balance 45%. Wonderful. And I'm surprised that the protection of physical safety is 0% in this pandemic. You guys are rock stars. Look at that. Okay, we can close the poll now. So these are things that we need to ask ourselves and to take into consideration before we accept employment, right? Even if we are in an employment situation right away, we could also assess it and have things change, right? And I have the resources at the end of this presentation where you can actually look into that. Canadian Mental Health Association, Mental Health Works, we actually provide a psychological health and safety advisor certification course. If anybody is interested, you could always contact me to know more or go to mentalhealthworks.ca. And we do have a registration. We have a course coming next week, but we have another one in March. But how can we know if a workplace is psychologically safe? Well, I did a little bit of internet research, and of course, Career Contessa is probably not, she's not a university, but I thought it was really interesting that the questions that she put up there and the red flag that she mentioned. So from the get-go, and I agree with this because, I'm a little bit older, I've been on the workforce for a while, and I agree with what she says. If the communication is unclear from the beginning, that would be a red flag for sure, because if they can't be clear in the beginning, you can be sure that when situations get more complex, then there will also be other challenges. Then flag number 2 was the interviewer gossips about current or former employees. If that ever happens, run. You don't want to be in that environment because that is a huge indicator. It's not a red flag. I think it's a neon sign saying that this is a toxic environment. If the person cannot be professional from the beginning, it is not a good sign. So the interview seems too short. If they don't really care about your answers, if they don't look at you, if they don't, acknowledge you in any way, they're not interested. Again, another red flag. The interviewer gaslights you. I've had that happen before where, and I did not accept the position. Somebody was asking me some odd questions that were, not appropriate and were almost like trying to look a combative almost, I would say. So that is something that you need to be careful. If there's a conflict from the start or it's condescending conversation, that's not a good environment. HR is non-existent or not respected, right? If there are some types of comments that are made, if they don't mention the HR department, if you ask a question on the structure and about psychological support and they don't have anything, I would be very concerned as well. The interviewer asks you personal, illegal, or irrelevant questions. I think that explains itself. After Diane's great presentation, we know that we don't need to disclose personal information in a workspace. And the interviewer evades your questions. Now, this would be something that is another huge red flag. If they don't want to answer the question, then it leads us to believe that there's something that is hidden or not clear. So those are really interesting. If you do a Google search yourself, you will be able to find even more questions. And I have some questions that I asked that we can talk about after the presentation. So whatever you select, the 3 top ones that you selected when we did the poll, I would highly encourage you to make up some questions that can help you determine whether or not the new workplace or the potential workplace addresses these needs. Okay, so you have the list. The presentation is going to be posted on the website, and you will be able to refer to it as needed. Also, Ottawa Public Health has videos on the 13 psychosocial factors. So if you want to do a search for that as well, you can look at what they say and craft your questions with that in mind, with these different psychosocial factors. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety. It is an 80-page book that I would highly recommend that you read. Yes, it can be a little bit dry. I love this stuff, so I find it very fascinating. These are things that you need to know to make sure that you can ensure your psychological well-being in the workspace. The 13 factors are addressed in the framework. The whole structure of assessing and helping to change work life, making workplaces psychologically healthy and safe. Oh my goodness, I apologize. It's all in the national standard, and they list other resources that can help you with that. And the best thing about this is that it really addresses all levels and roles, from policy to management to employee status. There are things that we can do at every level to improve psychological health and safety in the workplace. The different resources will help you identify, manage, and eliminate hazards and the risks of psychological harm, and it actively works to address the known factors. Now, some of the resources that I've listed here, and there are many, many more, that I would recommend that you explore and look into, because this is something that we need to take a proactive stance on improving for ourselves and for our colleagues. So there's the Mental Health Commission, the national standard that you can download for free. There are 13 factors addressing mental health in the workplace. So there's a checklist, there's a description. There are also surveys, frameworks, ways to assess it in your workspace. So I would highly recommend that you explore this a little bit more. And on that happy note, I want to thank you for listening to me for the past 20 minutes. And I would love to take some time and answer some questions if anybody has them. So I hope this was a valuable share for you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, Isabelle. That was so informative. I really appreciated that. So it looks like we do have one question that's sort of started us off by one attendee, Jenny Tang. This question, I believe, is for Dianne. So Dianne, our courts use the same criteria to judge credibility on people with severe mental disability, which is based on memory clarity. Is this a fundamental accessibility problem? Does that question make sense to you?
I'm not sure. I would invite the questioner to contact me at Arch so we could explore that a little bit further, or contact Arch and speak to any of the lawyers. I mean, all of us are very dedicated to what it is we do. Our phone number is 416-482-8255. And if you call our intake worker, she'll set up an appointment with one of the lawyers so we can discuss this further.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Dan. Hopefully we can get maybe a little bit more clarity from Jenny. Oh, here we go. It looks like not many awareness yet. I understand and appreciate. Okay, great. So thank you, Jenny. So we've done that. If there are any other questions, folks, please feel free to submit those in the Q&A, and I'd love to ask those of our presenters. In the meantime, I'm wondering, Isabelle, you mentioned that there were some questions that you had that would be good questions to ask in an interview to determine how employers field on those psychosocial factors. I'd love to hear those.
Absolutely. And again, I would invite everybody to look at the different factors that matter to you the most, and you can craft your own questions. But I do have some that I use personally and that I found on the internet and I thought they were good. So one of them is, when you can ask the interview, so how long have you been with the company, right? So that is a great opener to find out what's the turnover rate, right? Because that's what I want to find out when I'm asking that, is what's the turnover rate? How many people have been there for a long time, because it's not a good sign if there's a high turnover rate. Another one would be like, what do you enjoy most about working for this company or this organization, right? So that can give you a little bit of like if they're hesitating, if they're having a hard time finding something, then, again, that's a clear telltale sign. How would you describe the culture of the company is another one that I like, and that's where you can find out if people do other activities together, if they eat lunch together, if, it's a good way to see what the dynamic is. Another one is, what are the most challenging aspects of this position, right? So this will give you a bit of a hint on, how are you going to fare, and what's the interviewer or supervisor's attitude about what you're doing. Okay, because you can sense what they're saying depending on what words they're using. Another one is this a new position or am I replacing someone? Right? And then we'll give you more information. Or they'll give you some information you can ask more questions on and find out why the other person left, right? And people tell on themselves, their words might say something, but you will see from the person's behavior. I have a couple more. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, please. That'd be great.
Okay, great. Another one is what expectations do you have for me or for the successful candidate within the next 90 days, right? So that's how to check the workload management. And what kind of work are you going to be doing? Sometimes when you apply for a job, they say one thing, but then when you get there, there are other things that you need to be doing. So this is a little sneaky way to find out. And what do you look for in your ideal employee, right? Then you're going to be able to see what they value. And if you fit that, because if you don't fit that, then it might not be the best place for you to work, right? Depending on what they're looking for. I have a couple more. Are there opportunities for further development to know if you will progress or if you're going to stay in that position forever? And you can also ask if there's education, if there's funding for that, if they value that, if they want to invest in their employees. And there's a quote that I think of is there was two employers speaking, and I'm quoting this very loosely. And one of them said, what if I invest in my employees and they leave? And the other person said, what if you don't invest in them and they stay, right? So you want to be in an environment where they promote growth and furthering of skills because they're continuously improving the workplace, and that's a good sign. And the last one that I have is, are there team building activities, right? To see if they actively work on creating a positive work culture and teamwork within the office or the location of employment. So those are the questions that I prepared for everybody. I hope that was helpful.
Yes.
Again, yes, good. You got to get creative on finding out if it's a good fit. So
definitely. Those are some great questions. I even found some that I haven't used before. So that was really fantastic. Thank you.
Well, I can send them to you, and if you want to post them, then I'd be
that would be great, actually. Yeah, that's
okay.
a great idea.
Okay,
Fantastic. So I'm going to move over to Dianne now, and I'm wondering, Dianne, if you can, since we're on the topic of the interview process, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that and what that might be like, and at what points disclosure makes sense and doesn't make sense in the interview process and things like that.
So that's a really important question. The interview should be designed for you to be able to show your skills and competencies with respect to the job that you're applying for. But if you have gaps in your resume, I guess there's two ways to look at it. One, did you not get an interview because of the gaps in your resume? And then second, is there a way that you can explain the gaps in order to get the interview and then talk about the gaps at the interview? So when you apply for a job, all employers want to have people who are committed to the job, who are hardworking, who are conscientious. And gaps in your resume could be for a number of reasons. You wanted to travel, you had to take care of an ill family member, or they could be disability related for you in particular. If you get the interview, then the focus, the employer has looked at the gaps and may have determined that given your skills, they're not going to inquire into the gaps in your resume. But to leave that question unanswered may put you in a bit of a difficult situation, because in the back of their mind, they may be thinking about the gaps, but they don't know how to ask about them. So I would suggest being proactive and actually being direct with the employer. The gap was disability related. And during that time, the issues that I was experiencing were addressed so that I'm now ready to enter into competitive employment. Or during that time, I also learned or developed these other skills. You don't have to go into long explanations at all. I would be very brief and very direct and very to the point, so that you explain, yep, there are gaps. You could even address them in a cover letter if you wanted to. Yep, there's a gap. This is what it is. And, this is what I've learned, or this is what happened, and I'm ready for employment now. Disclosure is only when you need accommodations. Nobody is entitled to know your personal history or your experience with disability unless you want to be accommodated. So, for example, I had a client who had a very bad stutter, and when under stress, she, her speech was more pressured. And so she alerted the interviewer to that and asked if she could have the questions in advance so that there would be less stress. And what the potential employer did was say, well, what we'll do is we'll post the questions, or we'll put the questions on the desk so that everybody has access to them. Well, everybody didn't need access to them. This client needed them for a particular reason. And so, as it turned out, it was found that posting the questions on the desk were not the appropriate accommodation for her, that she should have got the questions in advance so that she could prepare. And so, look at your accommodation requests in that light. What do I need to show my very best at the interview? And what could the employer or potential employer give me so that I can show my very best? The other thing is that, employers should be really looking at the bona fide occupational requirements and give you an opportunity to offer them your best. And in the best of all possible worlds, an employer would have a set list of questions with a grade on them, and more than one interviewer, so that people can be compared apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And I think my final piece of advice is, if you get the interview, then you're there and you have passed a certain threshold for that employer, and therefore you really need a chance to show off why you're the right candidate for that job.
Thank you so much, Dianne. That was so insightful. I really appreciated that. That was great. All right. And with that, we have 2 minutes left and no other questions. So I don't want us to go over. So what I'll do is I'll say, let's give folks another minute back into their schedules. And I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to join me today and talk about returning to the workplace, or transitioning, to the workplace. And I want to thank all of the folks who joined us today. Thank you to everyone who participated in our polls and provided us with some questions. And please, if you can, remember to fill out our survey after. Thank you, everybody. That's all for today. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.